On New Year's Eve, I stood outside my son's mansion, snow soaking through my shoes, while music and laughter echoed from inside. He opened the door only 6 inches and said, "Dad, you don't belong here." Behind him, my daughter-in-law sprayed perfume on me and whispered, "That's better." My grandson held the scarf my late wife had knitted, then sneered, "It looks like trash. My other grandpa gives me much better things." That was when I realized they no longer saw me as family. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, drop a comment below. What are you doing while you listen? Driving, working, or just taking a moment? I read your comments more than you think. Quick note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling. What matters most is the lesson this story carries. At 68 years old, I stood on my son's porch in the December cold, gifts in hand, still believing family meant something. That belief died when the door closed in my face. Kurt opened it 6 inches. Not wide enough to welcome me in, just wide enough to confirm I had arrived. "Father," he said, not a greeting, an acknowledgement. Behind him, the Greenwich mansion glowed with warmth I could feel but never touch. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble, the kind of wealth that makes you forget where you came from. Music and laughter spilled through that 6-inch gap, along with the smell of expensive food I had not been invited to eat. "You made it," Kurt said, his tone flat as January ice. I had driven 4 hours through December snow, left Pennsylvania at 5, white-knuckling through a storm that shut down 3 exits on I-95. The gifts in my arms were wrapped in paper from Dollar General, trying to make $40 on a fixed income look like enough. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "New Year's Eve with family." Kurt Perry, 42 years old. My only son stood there wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my monthly groceries, blocking me from the warmth. He did not step aside, did not open the door wider. Over his shoulder, I saw 30, maybe 40 guests in evening attire, champagne glasses catching light. A life I had helped build with loans never repaid standing between me and my son like a wall. "Kurt, hurry up." Marlene Perry appeared beside him, 37, and wearing diamonds at her throat. My daughter-in-law looked at me the way you look at a stain. "You're letting the warmth out." She did not say hello. Behind them, a man's voice boomed. Vernon Caldwell, 64, Marlene's father, and the man whose manufacturing company I had saved from bankruptcy in 1999, with a loan guarantee he never acknowledged. He looked past Kurt, past me straight at my 15-year-old pickup between 2 Mercedes. "I thought the delivery service was late," Vernon announced loud enough for every guest to hear. The room erupted in laughter. Kurt's face did not change, did not defend me, did not tell his father-in-law that the delivery service was his father, a retired civil engineer who had spent 35 years building Pennsylvania's infrastructure. Marlene smiled, not at me, at the joke. "Just leave the gifts in the back kitchen area, Father," she said, already turning away. "We're in the middle of hosting." Not the living room where other gifts sat beneath a 12-foot tree, the back kitchen area, where you put things you do not want guests to see. I had driven 4 hours through December snow to stand on this porch. My son had opened the door 6 inches. Tanner Perry appeared then, 16, and lanky my grandson, who I had not seen in 2 years. He took the gift bag from my hands without meeting my eyes, opened it right there in front of the crowd. He pulled out the navy wool scarf, the one Rosalind had started knitting 3 months before cancer, took her the one I had spent a year teaching myself to finish, because I could not let her last project die unfinished. Every stitch was a prayer. Tanner held it up between 2 fingers. "And this looks old," he said, not to me, to the guests. They laughed again. Gail Caldwell, 61. Vernon's wife laughed loudest. Her champagne glass caught the chandelier light as she covered her mouth in mock horror. Marlene was arranging people for a photograph. The countdown to midnight. Everyone gathering in front of the fireplace, phones out, smiles ready. I stood at the door, still holding a small wrapped box with a pocket watch inside. My grandfather's watch. Carried through 2 wars, 3 generations. "Wait a minute," Marlene said, suddenly looking through her phone screen. "Don't let him get in the background." Kurt shifted, blocking me from the frame. My son. The boy I had raised alone after Rosalind died. The child I had worked double shifts to put through private school, through college, through business school. He stepped left, so the photograph of his perfect life would not include proof I existed. The camera clicked. Everyone cheered. I stood outside the frame of my own family. Kurt turned back to me, reached into his pocket. I thought for a moment he might have a gift, something small, an acknowledgement that I had driven through a snowstorm to see him. He slipped an envelope into my jacket pocket, patted my shoulder once without making eye contact. "Roads are dangerous tonight," he said quietly. "You should head home early." The door closed, not slammed, just closed, soft and final as a coffin lid. I heard Marlene's voice through the wood. "Smells better already." The sound of aerosol spray, perfume erasing whatever scent I had brought into their clean, expensive air. If you have ever stood somewhere you are no longer welcome, you know. The cold goes deeper than weather. I pulled the envelope from my pocket under the porch light, opened it with fingers going numb. Inside, 4 $10 bills and a discount card for a gas station chain. $40. I counted twice to make sure. 4 hours through December, snow, $40, gas money. That is what my presence was worth to the son I had raised. Through the window I could see them toasting. Kurt raising champagne surrounded by people who had just laughed at me. Tanner showing someone his phone, probably texting friends about the pathetic old man with the handmade scarf. Marlene, smiling, radiant, hosting the perfect party now that the embarrassment had been removed. I walked around the side of the house. The gift bag with the navy scarf sat beside the trash bins near the back door. Not inside the trash, not yet, but close enough. I picked it up. Rosalind's stitches against my palm, the yarn she had chosen, the pattern she had started to love, I had tried to finish. There was only one place left where I was still welcome. I stood on that porch with $40 in my hand, watching through the window as my son raised a champagne glass to toast the new year with people who had just laughed at me. The gift bag with the scarf Rosalind started knitting before she died sat in my other hand, rescued from beside the trash. The cemetery waited 3 miles away. Rosalind had been there alone long enough. The gift bag sat beside the trash bins where Tanner had left it. I bent to pick it up without looking back at the door. I had already heard everything I needed to hear. I straightened the bag in my hand, Rosalind's navy scarf inside. Through the window, I could see them laughing, Kurt's head thrown back at something Vernon said. Champagne glasses raised. A perfect New Year's Eve party now that the embarrassment had been removed. I straightened the bag in my hand, Rosalind's navy scarf inside. Through the window, I could see them laughing, Kurt's head thrown back at something Vernon said. Champagne glasses raised. A perfect New Year's Eve party, now that the embarrassment had been removed. I did not turn around. I had learned that some insults are designed to make you turn around to see if they landed to confirm you felt them. I kept walking to my truck, shoulders straight, despite the weight pressing on them. What I did not know was that Hazel Sinclair, 65, who lived in the house next door, had a small black security camera on her patio. A dome no bigger than a fist angled to catch anyone approaching her property. It caught the mansion's side entrance instead. Caught Marlene's voice through the door. Caught the perfume spray. Caught my shoulders hunching despite my best effort. Caught my slow walk to the old pickup truck parked between 2 Mercedes. I would not learn about that camera for 3 weeks, but it was recording. Inside the truck, I turned on the engine and let it warm. Pulled the envelope from my pocket again, even though I had already counted. 2 $20 bills. A gas station discount card for a chain I had never used. No note, no explanation. Just $40 for a 4-hour drive through a December snowstorm. I did the math in my head the way I used to calculate load-bearing weight when I was still working. Harrisburg to Greenwich, 238 miles. My truck got 17 miles per gallon, on a good day maybe 15 in snow. That was 16 gallons. Gas was $2.95 a gallon last I checked. $47 in fuel. Kurt had given me $40. $7 short of what it cost to visit him. I looked at the gift bag on the passenger seat. The navy scarf Rosalind had started 3 months before the cancer took her voice, then her strength, then everything else. I had found it in her knitting basket after the funeral half finished. Spent a year teaching myself from YouTube videos how to finish what her hands could not. Every drop stitch was a prayer. Every completed row was a promise that I would not let her last creation die unfinished. Tanner had held it between 2 fingers like garbage. $40, 4 hours, 42 years of marriage. Everything in my life could be measured now, and none of it added up to enough. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the only place that still wanted me. Greenwich Cemetery sat 3 miles from Kurt's mansion, tucked behind a stone wall and iron gates that stayed unlocked year-round. I had called in November, asking about their midnight policy. The groundskeeper said they never locked the gates on New Year's Eve. Too many people wanted to start the year with the dead. I had planned to visit Rosalind at midnight anyway, back when I thought I would arrive nostalgic instead of devastated, back when I thought my son's invitation meant I was welcome. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes that stuck to the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. The streets of Greenwich glowed with holiday lights strung from lampposts and wrapped around tree trunks. Behind tall windows I could see families gathered, tables set, lives continuing in warm rooms where people who loved each other said each other's names without flinching. The cemetery gates appeared through the snow like an answer to a question I had not known how to ask. Yellow park lights flickered at the entrance, casting long shadows across headstones that marched in neat rows toward the darkness. I pulled into the small lot and checked the dashboard clock. 11:47, 13 minutes until midnight. 13 minutes until the new year arrived, and I would spend it with the only person who never made me feel small. Grief is a country with no roads back. You can only drive forward into it deeper until you find a place to stop and breathe. I grabbed the gift bag and stepped out into the snow. It crunched under my boots, fresh and untouched. In the distance, someone set off early fireworks, pops of color against the black sky. A celebration happening somewhere I was not invited. Rosalind's grave sat under the old oak tree at the cemetery's east corner, the same tree where we had our first picnic in 1981, back when this was just empty land, and we were just two people who did not know yet how short 42 years would feel. The township bought the land for a cemetery in 1985. When Rosalind died last year, I made sure she was buried here, under the branches that had shaded our first kiss. The headstone was simple, gray granite, her name, her dates. The inscription we had chosen together when she could still speak, she worked nights so others could dream. Kurt had not helped me choose it, said he was too busy with a business deal, sent flowers to the funeral but left before the burial. I had stood alone at this spot while they lowered her into the ground, and I had promised her something I was only now beginning to understand. I walked toward the grave through snow that was falling harder now, each flake catching the yellow lamplight like tiny pieces of a world coming apart. The fireworks continued in the distance, someone's early countdown somewhere in Greenwich, where people still had reasons to celebrate. I knelt in the snow at my wife's headstone, the gift bag in my hands, and realized I was not alone. A woman stood 3 graves over, holding a thermos, watching me, with the kind of recognition that comes from shared sorrow. The woman 3 graves over was pretending not to watch me, the way you pretend not to notice someone crying on a bus. She held a thermos against her chest, steam rising into the cold air, and I could feel her careful attention like heat from a distant fire. I turned back to Rosalind's headstone, brushed snow from the engraved letters of her name with fingers already going numb. The fireworks had stopped. Midnight had passed. Somewhere in Greenwich, Kurt was kissing Marlene, toasting the new year with people who thought I was delivery service. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up too bright in the darkness, showing the time, 12:03 a.m. January 1st. A new year I did not want to enter alone. I opened my voicemail archive, scrolled past messages from the dentist from the township about trash pickup from the pharmacy, found the one I had saved for 3 years. Pressed play. Rosalind's voice filled the cemetery. "Remember to buy the bread," she said, her tone light teasing, "the kind without seeds, and cut the crusts off Kurt's sandwich, you know he hates crusts." I could hear the hospital sounds behind her voice, the beep of monitors, the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. This was 3 years before she died, when we still thought the treatments might work. She was calling from her hospital bed to remind me about sandwich crusts for a 36-year-old man. "Love you," she said at the end. "See you tonight." The message ended. I played it again. If you have ever listened to a dead person's voice on your phone, you know it is not the words that break you. It is how ordinary they are, how she thought she would see me that night, how she worried about crusts. Her last words in the hospital were not about money or the house or what would happen to me after she was gone. Her last question, whispered through the oxygen mask 3 days before everything ended, was this: "Has Kurt had dinner yet?" I had said yes. I lied. I did not know. Kurt had not visited in 2 weeks. The woman she spent 39 years worrying about making sure his sandwiches had no crusts, working night shifts at the library for 6 years, so we could afford his private school tuition, that man had just given me less than it cost in gas to visit him. I pressed my palms against my eyes, but the tears came anyway. Not from the humiliation on the porch, not from the perfume spray or the $40 or Vernon's laughter, from missing her, from sitting in snow at her grave on New Year's Eve because there was nowhere else that wanted me. No one sits outside a cemetery on New Year's Eve and is okay. The voice startled me. I looked up. The woman had crossed the 3 graves between us, thermos in one hand, a small metal cup in the other. She was maybe 67, wearing a long wool coat and a scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Her face was kind in the way that comes from knowing grief personally. "I am fine," I said, wiping my eyes with my coat sleeve. "No," she said gently, "you are not." She poured tea from the thermos into the cup, handed it to me without asking if I wanted it. The steam rose between us, and I wrapped my frozen fingers around the metal, feeling warmth for the first time since leaving my truck. "My son does not need me anymore," I said, the only words I could manage. The woman I would not learn her name was Norma Garrett until she told me later, along with the fact that she was 67 and had been bringing a thermos to her late husband's grave every New Year's Eve for 20 years, sat down in the snow beside me, not on a bench, not standing above me. She sat in the frozen grass so I would not be alone, not on a bench, not standing above me. She sat in the frozen grass so I would not be alone. "Then he is the one who was lost," she said quietly. "Not you." We sat in silence. The tea was strong and sweet. She did not ask what happened, did not ask about my son or why I was crying or what brought me here at midnight. She just sat with me, 2 strangers in a cemetery sharing the weight of the world. A stranger's gloves, a son's $40. I knew which one would keep me warm. After a while she stood, brushed snow from her coat, reached into her pocket and pulled out a pair of old woolen gloves worn soft at the fingertips, where a man had gripped things for years. "These were my husband's," she said, pressing them into my hands. "He does not need them anymore. Do not let your hands get cold again." "I cannot take these," I said. "Yes," she said, "you can." She walked toward the cemetery gate, her thermos tucked under her arm, her footprints dark in the fresh snow. I watched her go, watched her disappear through the iron gates. A stranger who had given me warmth my own son had denied. I pulled on the gloves. They fit perfectly, the wool still holding the shape of someone else's hands. My fingers thawed inside them, blood returning to places that had gone numb. The stranger tonight was the only one who would not leave me standing outside in the cold. I sat alone at Rosalind's grave, wearing a dead stranger's gloves, my hands warm for the first time since leaving Kurt's porch. And I understood something Rosalind had been trying to tell me in that last hospital question. She was not asking if Kurt had dinner. She was asking if I still believed in the son who no longer existed. The answer was written in $40 and perfume spray and sandwich crusts she had worried about for 30 years. Rosalind worked the night shift at the public library for 6 years, so our son could attend a school where children did not have to work at all. 6 years, 1986 to 1992. Every night from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., shelving books in the quiet dark while Kurt slept in his bed and dreamed of being someone important. She would leave our Harrisburg house after I kissed her goodbye walk, 4 blocks to catch the bus, because we only had 1 car and I needed it for the construction sites. She would come home at dawn smelling like old books and floor wax, her fingers stained with the ink from date stamps and her back aching from reaching high shelves. I would wake sometimes and find her coat still cold from the January walk home. Find her in the bathroom, changing clothes in the dark, trying not to wake me, even though I was already awake, had been awake since I heard her key in the lock. "Go back to sleep," she would whisper. "You have work in 3 hours." "So do you," I would say, because she worked days at the elementary school cafeteria, serving lunch to other people's children, before coming home to cook dinner for ours. "He needs to go to a good school," she said once in 1987, when I asked if it was too much. "I can sleep when he is grown." $4,200 per year. Private school tuition. We could not afford it on my salary alone, not with the mortgage and the car payment and everything else. So, Rosalind worked nights. For 6 years. $25,200 total. She paid in nights she could have spent sleeping in books she never got to read for herself, in hours, stolen from the only life she would ever have. The son she did this for had just given me less than it cost in gas to visit him. $25,000 in night shifts, $40 in an envelope. The math of a mother's love versus a son's gratitude does not balance. I remembered a moment from 1994. Kurt was 12, sitting at our kitchen table doing homework. He looked up suddenly, pencil in hand, and announced to the world, "When I'm rich, I'll buy you the biggest house in town, Mom." Rosalind had smiled, touched his hair. "I don't need a big house. Mom just wants you to remember to come home." She said it like a joke, but I heard the hope underneath. The quiet wish that all those night shifts would buy her something money could not, a son who remembered where he came from. Kurt did buy the big house. Greenwich Mansion, $3.2 million, marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and a view of Long Island Sound. Everything Rosalind never wanted. And tonight he would not let his father through the door. I thought about Rosalind's last words in the hospital. Not last words exactly. Last question. She had been unconscious for most of that final day, the oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. But she woke once late afternoon, and her eyes found mine across the beeping machines and the IV lines, and all the technology that could not save her. "Has Kurt had dinner yet?" she whispered. I said yes. I lied. I did not know. Kurt had not visited in 2 weeks, had called once to say he was busy with a deal in Arizona, would try to make it before the end. He did not make it. She died at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Kurt arrived 6 hours later, still wearing his golf clothes. That question, "Has Kurt had dinner yet?" kept me calling him every Sunday for 2 years, even when he rarely answered, kept me driving 4 hours through snowstorms with gifts he did not want, kept me silent when he forgot my birthday, when he canceled Christmas, when he stopped pretending I mattered. Because I thought that was what Rosalind wanted. I thought she died worrying about him, wanting him taken care of, wanting me to keep checking on him no matter what. But sitting at her grave, wearing a stranger's gloves, I finally understood. How long does a parent wait before understanding that waiting is not love? It is permission for the child to forget where he came from. Rosalind wanted her son well fed. She did not want her son to trample the man who loved them both. She worked $25,000 worth of night shifts so Kurt could have opportunities not. So he could use those opportunities to treat his father like delivery service. That last question was not about dinner. It was about whether I still believed in a son who no longer existed. Whether I could finally see what she had seen in those final moments, that the boy she raised was gone, replaced by a man who valued his father at $40. The decision did not come from anger. It came from love. Love for the woman who gave 6 years of sleep for a child who grew up to throw his father's gifts beside the trash. Love for the night shifts and the cold walks and the quiet hope that it would mean something. I stood, placed my hand on the cold granite of her tombstone. Snow had settled in the carved letters of her name. "I'm sorry, my love," I said aloud to the winter dark. "I have put it off too long." Protecting Kurt from consequences was not what Rosalind wanted. Letting him forget where he came from was not honoring her sacrifice. The decision was made here at her grave, not in anger, but in memory of a woman who deserved better than a son who forgot to come home. I walked back to my truck through snow that had stopped falling, wearing a stranger's gloves that kept my hands warmer than my son's door ever had. On the passenger seat sat the gift bag with Rosalind's unfinished scarf and a small envelope I had been carrying for 8 months. Inside the envelope was a business card. Quentin Finch, estate attorney, the man who had helped me set everything in motion before I even knew I would need it. What Quentin did not know was that I had been prepared for this call longer than even he realized. He had set an automatic monitoring trigger in October. Any missed payment would begin the documentation process. He had not told me because he hoped, like I did, that it would never be needed. When the first payment failed to arrive, he began building the file quietly, still hoping the second month would come. It did not. Nor did the third. By December, he had stopped hoping and started waiting for my call. The key to the locked drawer in my home office was small and brass, and had opened the same lock for 8 months without my son knowing what was inside. I arrived back in Harrisburg just after 5 in the morning. The drive from Greenwich had taken longer in the dark, through snow that started falling again, somewhere near Allentown. My house sat quiet on the street, where I had raised Kurt, a small 2-bedroom with vinyl siding and a front porch that needed painting. Nothing like the mansion he lived in now. I unlocked the front door and went straight to my office, the room where I used to help Kurt with his math homework, where Rosalind used to balance our checkbook at the desk by the window. The desk was still there, so was the drawer that locked. I pulled the brass key from my wallet, where I had kept it for 8 months, and slid it into the lock. The file inside was thick. Legal documents are heavy when they hold $3.2 million in property. The folder was labeled in Quentin Finch's precise handwriting, Rosalind Foundation Trust. Delaware, LLC logo in the corner. official seals and notary stamps layering the edges. I had opened this drawer every Sunday for 8 months. Each time I considered calling Kurt to confess what I had done. Each time I locked it again instead. Quentin said this was the cleanest trust structure he had built in 20 years. 3 layers, untraceable. Even if someone looked, they would find nothing but shell companies and forwarding addresses. I opened the file to the ownership page. Owner Rosalind Foundation Trust. Trustee Arthur Perry, beneficiary. To be determined upon termination of trust. Property address 47. Waterside Lane, Greenwich, Connecticut. Market value $3,200,000. My son lives in my house. My son does not know. This has been true for 8 months. It started in May of last year. Kurt called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I knew something was wrong because he never called on Tuesdays. He was crying, not the crying of a child, but the desperate crying of a man who has run out of options. The mansion, he said, his voice breaking. It's in foreclosure. Marlene doesn't know yet. I'm 90 days from losing everything. He had overextended, taken a second mortgage to invest in a commercial development in Arizona that fell through. The monthly payments were $19,000, and he had missed 3 in a row. The bank had sent the final notice. I need help, he said. I don't know who else to call. I could have said no. Could have let him lose the house, let him learn what it means to fall. But I thought about Rosalind working night shifts, so he could have opportunities. Thought about her last question in the hospital, still worrying about him, when she should have been worrying about herself. So I helped him, but I did not give him money. I gave him a mystery. Quentin structured it perfectly. Used my retirement savings and the life insurance payout from Rosalind to create a trust. Rosalind's life insurance payout was $900,000. I liquidated my retirement accounts for another $600,000, $1.5 million in combined assets. Quentin used that as down payment to purchase Kurt's defaulted mortgage from the bank. At a 62-cent discount, banks sell defaulted loans cheaply to recover fast. The trust paid $1.1 million for a debt originally worth $1.8 million. We then held the note on the full property value of $3.2 million. It was not magic. It was the same math I used for 35 years calculating load-bearing structures. You find the weak point, apply force correctly, and the numbers hold. The trust bought Kurt's defaulted mortgage from the bank at a discount, restructured the terms, and became his anonymous landlord. Kurt thinks a secret investment fund saved him. Some benefactor who believed in his potential. He spent 6 months trying to find out who it was, even hired a private investigator last month. The trail died at a Delaware mail drop. He has been living in my house ever since, drinking coffee in a kitchen I own, sleeping in bedrooms that belong to a trust named after his mother. And he does not know. Have you ever owned something someone else believes is theirs? The power sits quiet, waiting patient as snow. I turned to another page in the file. Found the document from 1999 that Quentin had insisted I include, proof that this was not the first time I had saved someone who would forget to be grateful. The memory came back sharp as winter air. Vernon Caldwell sat at my kitchen table crying. This was before the mansion, before the wealth, before he became the kind of man who could call someone delivery service at a party. This was when his construction company was 3 days from bankruptcy. I will lose everything, Arthur, he said, his voice shaking. The house, the business, everything. I need someone to guarantee this loan. Please. $180,000. That was the number. I did not have it. But I had equity in my house and a credit rating good enough to sign my name to his debt. Rosalind stood at the stove making coffee. She poured Vernon a cup and set it in front of him without a word. Cream is on the table, Vernon, she said quietly, giving him dignity by not acknowledging his tears. I signed the guarantee. Vernon's company survived, grew, made millions over the next 2 decades. He never mentioned that kitchen table again. Never sent a thank you card on the anniversary. Never told his daughter Marlene that the father-in-law she treats like hired help is the reason her father has anything to give her. Rosalind said something to me that night after Vernon left. The person you save when they are most embarrassed, she said, washing the coffee cups in our old sink, is the person who will most want to forget you exist. I did not believe her then. I believe her now. Last night, that same man looked at my pickup truck and called me delivery service. His daughter sprayed perfume to erase the smell of me. And they did this in a house that I own, built on opportunities I helped create, standing on foundations I poured with my own hands. I closed the file and locked the drawer with the same small brass key. Outside the window, snow had begun falling again on the quiet Pennsylvania street where I had raised a son who no longer knew me. In Greenwich, Kurt was waking up in a house that had never belonged to him, drinking coffee in a kitchen I owned, believing himself safe. The phone number for Quentin Finch sat in my jacket pocket, and for the first time in 8 months, I was ready to use it. I dialed Quentin Finch's number at 8:15 on the morning of January 2nd, and he answered before the second ring, as if he had been waiting beside the phone. "Arthur," he said, not a question, a statement, like he knew exactly why I was calling. Quentin Finch, 41, had been my estate attorney for 8 months. I met him through a referral from the bank that had handled Rosalind's life insurance payout. He specialized in trust structures and asset protection, the kind of legal architecture that keeps wealthy people wealthy, and their children from knowing exactly how wealthy. When I told him what I wanted to do, buy back my son's mortgage without my son knowing, he did not blink. "Has Kurt violated the trust payment terms?" I asked. My voice was steady, businesslike, as if I were discussing whether or not dismantling my son's life. "Yes," Quentin said immediately. 3 consecutive months late, October, November, December. I had not known. The trust was structured so payments went directly to an escrow account Quentin managed. I received quarterly summaries, and the September report had shown 3 months of clean payments. I had not checked since. There are things a father avoids looking at too closely when he is still hoping his son will find his way back. That was my mistake. I called it patience. It was avoidance. "And has he attempted to remortgage or use the property as collateral?" I asked. There was a pause, brief but noticeable. "Yes," Quentin said carefully, "twice. Both attempts failed because he does not own the property. But he does not know that is why they failed. The bank simply told him his application was denied due to insufficient documentation." I leaned back in my office chair, the same chair where I used to help Kurt with algebra, where Rosalind used to sit doing crossword puzzles on Sunday mornings. Outside the window, snow covered the street in the kind of white silence that makes everything feel suspended. "What is the extent?" I asked. $73,000 in late payments, Quentin said. 2 illegal remortgage attempts totaling $640,000 in fraudulent loan applications, and 1 personal loan using the house as collateral to a man named Desmond Wolfe, an investor in his Arizona project. That one is particularly problematic because Kurt signed documents claiming full ownership of the property. I closed my eyes. $73,000, $640,000 in fraud. And Kurt had stood at his door 2 nights ago and given me less than it cost in gas to visit him. "I have been compiling the file for 3 months, Quentin said quietly. "Since the first missed payment in October, I knew you would call eventually." "Why did you not call me when the violation started?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Because this decision had to be yours, not mine," Quentin said. "A father activating legal action against his son, you had to arrive at that yourself. If I had called you and said your son was in violation, you might have felt pressured, obligated. This way, when you called me, I knew you were ready." Quentin had been waiting 3 months. I had been waiting 2 years. The difference was that Quentin knew what he was waiting for. "Every late payment is documented," he continued. "Every illegal attempt to leverage the property, every misuse of corporate funds to cover his personal debts. The file is complete, Arthur. It has been ready since mid-December. I was simply waiting for your permission to act." "I have been waiting for you to call," he said. "Not hoping, waiting. There is a difference." I understood the difference. Hope is passive. Waiting is preparation. "What happens now?" I asked. Quentin's voice shifted, became more formal. This was the attorney, not the man who had sat across from me 8 months ago, listening to me explain why I wanted to save my son without him knowing. "That depends on what you want," he said. "Do you want this quiet, or do you want them to know exactly who saved them?" The question sat between us like a test. Quiet would mean a private settlement. Kurt would be informed of the trust ownership, given 30 days to vacate, and the whole thing would happen behind closed doors. Marlene would never have to explain to her friends why they lost the house. Tanner and Wren would not have to change schools. Vernon would not have to watch his daughter's marriage crumble in public. Public would mean filing the violation notices, making the ownership transfer a matter of public record, announcing to Kurt's investors, his in-laws, his social circle, that the mansion he claimed as proof of success belonged to the father he treated like delivery service. What is the opposite of a quiet ending? A stage, an audience, a moment when everyone finally sees what was hidden. I want them to know, I said. The words came out calm, certain, but only when the time is right, and I will choose the timing. Then we wait for the right moment, Quentin said, and when it comes, we make sure everyone is watching. I could hear him writing something down, a note, a date, a reminder to himself about what we were planning. How long do you want to wait? He asked. Not long, I said, but strategically. I want to see the full violation file first, understand exactly what we have. When would you like to see it in person? I looked at the calendar on my desk. January 2nd. Kurt would be back at work today, believing himself safe, believing his anonymous savior had asked for nothing in return, believing the banks had denied his remortgage attempts for normal bureaucratic reasons, not because he was trying to steal from a house he did not own. Tomorrow, I said. I will drive to Greenwich tomorrow. I will have everything ready, Quentin said. Before he hung up, he said one more thing. Arthur, he said quietly, I am sorry it came to this. And so am I said. But here we are. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my small office. In Greenwich, Kurt was waking up in a house that had never belonged to him, drinking coffee in a kitchen I owned, believing himself clever enough to hide his failures. Tomorrow I would drive to Greenwich to see exactly how deep my son had dug his own grave. The violation file was 3 inches thick and organized with the kind of precision that comes from someone who knows they are building a case that cannot fail. Quentin's office sat on the 3rd floor of a glass building overlooking Greenwich's Winter Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A long conference table made of dark wood. 3 document stacks waiting for me, each with a printed label, the kind of office that costs money to rent and more money to furnish. I had driven from Harrisburg that morning, left at 6 to avoid traffic, the same route I had taken 3 nights ago with gifts my son threw away. But this time, I was not bringing presents. I was coming to see evidence. Quentin stood when I entered, shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from the document stacks. Coffee, he asked. No, I said. Show me what you have. He sat, pulled the first stack toward him. Eddie stack 1, he said, 3 consecutive months late. October 15th, November 15th, December 15th, $24,600 unpaid. He slid a payment ledger across the table, 3 red X marks, 3 dates circled. The trust terms were printed at the top, payment due by 15th of each month. Default activated after 2 consecutive failures. The trust terms require payment by the 15th. I asked, even though I knew the answer. I had signed those terms 8 months ago. Yes, Quentin said. And the default clause activates after 2 consecutive failures. We are past that threshold by 1 month. $8,200 per month. That was what Kurt owed to live in a house he thought belonged to him. Less than the property taxes on a mansion that size. Less than what Marlene probably spent on clothes. And he could not pay it for 3 months straight. Where did the money go? I asked. Quentin flipped to another page. Highlighted sections showed wire transfers, business investments, Arizona land deals, a company called Desert Vista Holdings that existed only on paper. He has been using the rental savings to fund other ventures, Quentin said, ventures that are not profitable. I looked at the numbers, looked at my son's financial decisions laid out in spreadsheets that proved he had learned nothing about money, about consequences, about the difference between appearing wealthy and being solvent. Stack 2, Quentin said, moving to the second pile. 2 remortgage applications, both denied. Same reason each time applicant not listed as legal owner of property. He slid 2 bank rejection letters across the table. One from Bank of Connecticut dated November 14th. One from First Greenwich National dated December 19th. Both letters were 2 pages. Standard language, professional courtesy. We regret to inform you that your application has been denied due to incomplete documentation and verification issues. He does not know that is why they were rejected, I asked. No, Quentin said. The bank cited other reasons in their rejection letters. He has no idea the real problem is he is trying to mortgage property he does not own. My son had tried to mortgage my house, twice, and failed both times without knowing why. The irony sat heavy in that glass office. Kurt believing his credit was too low, his business records too messy, his documentation too incomplete. Never suspecting the truth that the father he kicked out on New Year's Eve owned every inch of marble he walked on. How much was he trying to borrow? I asked. First attempt, $420,000, Quentin said. Second attempt, $610,000. Both applications listed the mansion as primary collateral, both legally invalid. Over $1 million. That was what Kurt thought his house was worth to banks. That was how much he believed he could leverage against property that was never his. Stack 3, Quentin said, and his voice got quieter, more careful. November 20th, private loan from Desmond Wolfe, $340,000. Collateral listed 47 Waterside Lane, Greenwich, the mansion, also invalid. This stack was thinner, but heavier. A private loan agreement, signed by both parties, notarized. Legal language that meant nothing because Kurt had pledged something he could not pledge. Who is Desmond Wolfe? I asked. An investor in Kurt's Arizona project, Quentin said. When the project failed, Wolfe demanded his money back. Kurt could not pay, so he offered the house as collateral. Told Wolfe it was worth over $3 million, that he would refinance within 60 days and pay him back. That was November. It is now January. Wolfe is demanding payment by the end of this month. And when Kurt cannot pay, Wolfe will attempt to foreclose on the collateral, Quentin said, which will fail because Kurt does not own it, at which point Wolfe will likely sue Kurt for fraud. There are two kinds of justice, the kind that happens in private and the kind that everyone remembers. When can we act on these violations? I asked. Quentin leaned back in his chair, looked at me with the kind of expression lawyers get when they know the answer their client wants, but need to hear the question asked correctly. We can act right now, he said. File repossession tomorrow if you want. Serve eviction papers by the end of the week. Have Kurt out of the house in 30 days. But that is not the right question. What is the right question? The question is, do you want this quiet or do you want it unforgettable? I looked at the 3 stacks of documents, $24,000 unpaid, 2 failed mortgages, $340,000 in invalid collateral. Every number was a violation. Every violation was a choice Kurt made, believing no one would ever check. Quentin watched me with the patience of someone who already knew which answer I would choose. Before I could speak, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, looked up at me with something that might have been satisfaction. There is someone else who wants to talk to you about your son, he said. The woman sitting across from me in the cafe had the look of someone who had brought insurance to a meeting where she expected betrayal. Quentin had called me from the conference room 30 minutes after showing me the violation files. Said there was someone I needed to meet, someone with information about Kurt that went beyond missed payments and failed mortgages. We drove 3 blocks to a small cafe near Perry Consulting Group, the company Kurt ran from the mansion's converted study. Celeste Hampton, 34, sat at a corner table with a manila envelope and a coffee she had not touched. She was younger than I expected, dressed in business casual with the careful posture of someone who had learned to document everything because trust was expensive. Quentin made introductions without explaining who I was, just said my name. Arthur Perry, watched her face for recognition. She showed none. Thank you for meeting, she said, her voice professional and guarded. I want to be clear from the start. I am not here because I want to help anyone. I am here because Kurt Perry tried to destroy my career to cover his own mistakes. She opened the envelope, pulled out a single USB drive, and set it on the table between us like evidence at a trial. What happened 3 months ago? Quentin asked. Celeste's jaw tightened. October, she said. Kurt discovered a financial discrepancy in the company accounts. $87,000 in unexplained credit card payments. He called a meeting with 3 of his largest investors, told them I had misreported the accounts, that I had failed to properly categorize expenses, that the error was mine. She looked at me, then making sure I was listening. It was not my error, she said. It was his misuse of corporate funds to pay his personal credit cards. But he stood in that conference room and blamed me in front of people whose money he needed. I almost lost my CPA license in the investigation that followed. So you started keeping copies of everything, Quentin said. Yes, Celeste said. Every transaction, every authorization, every email where Kurt told me to categorize personal expenses as business costs. This USB contains 18 months of documentation. She slid the drive toward Quentin. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand like it weighed more than plastic should weigh. 18 months, she said. $340,000, every transaction documented. I had not spoken yet. Just sat there listening to a stranger describe my son as someone who destroyed careers to save himself. Someone who lied to investors and blamed the accountant who knew too much. Personal credit cards paid from corporate accounts, Quentin asked. $87,000, Celeste confirmed. Luxury car rentals disguised as client transportation, $43,000. His nephew Tanner's private school tuition, filed as employee education benefits, $62,000. Parties at the Greenwich Mansion to impress potential investors, all charged as business development, costs $89,000. Other personal expenses that I categorized as he's instructed, $59,000. $340,000, 18 months. Kurt had been stealing from his own company while his father quietly owned the roof over his head. I have receipts, she continued. Bank transfers, emails where he specifically told me how to categorize each payment. He was careful to make it look legitimate on paper, but I kept the real records. Quentin set the USB down, looked at her with the kind of respect lawyers give to witnesses who bring documentation instead of stories. Why now? He asked. Why contact me today? Because I heard he is in trouble, Celeste said. Financial trouble, the kind where people start looking for someone to blame. And I will not be blamed twice. She meant it. This was not righteousness. This was survival. Quentin glanced at me. I nodded. Time to tell her. Do you know who my client is? Quentin asked. Celeste looked at me carefully. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition arriving slowly, like a face seen from the wrong angle suddenly coming clear. You came on Sundays, she said. You sat in the kitchen while Kurt took calls. I saw you through the office window. She paused. I never knew your name. Kurt never introduced you to anyone. Arthur Perry, Quentin said. Kurt's father. The espresso machine hissed in the background. Celeste set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. I worked in that house for 3 years, she said quietly. I processed every transaction in that building. I filed documents in the upstairs office with a window facing the sound. She looked at me with the particular expression of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew. You came on Sundays and sat alone in the kitchen. Kurt always seemed annoyed that you'd arrived. He was, I said. The man who visited on Sundays, she said slowly, was the one holding all the cards the entire time. How do you work somewhere for 3 years and never know who owns the walls around you? I never knew, she said. No one knows, Quentin said. That is exactly what he wants. Celeste picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking, looked at the USB drive on the table, then back at me. The simple man who visited on Sundays, she said, was the one holding all the cards the entire time. I nodded. She leaned back in her chair, recalculating. I could see it happening behind her eyes. The quiet father who never raised his voice, who sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while his son conducted business, who left after an hour without demanding attention. That man owned everything Kurt pretended to own. Does he know, she asked, that you own the house? No, I said, my first word since sitting down. Celeste looked at the USB drive again, at the manila envelope, at Quentin, and then at me. There is more you need to know, she said, about what Kurt has been doing with investor money. The woman sitting across the conference table from me had worked in my house for 3 years without knowing it was mine. And now she was about to tell me my son was running a criminal enterprise. We had moved from the cafe to Quentin's office the next morning. Celeste brought a laptop and a file box of printed records. She connected the computer to the large screen on the wall, and financial spreadsheets filled the display with numbers that looked legitimate until you understood what they meant. Perry Consulting Group. Celeste began, her voice steady and professional. Claims to be a real estate consulting firm, advising on property development in Connecticut and New York. She clicked to the next slide. A company website screenshot, professional photos, mission statement about innovation and excellence. Kurt's headshot in a suit I recognized from Christmas 3 years ago. I worked there for 3 years as in-house accountant, she said. Part-time, 20 hours per week, office in the upstairs bedroom of the Greenwich Mansion. She paused, looked at me directly. In that time, the company consulted on exactly 0 real estate projects. The silence in the room had weight. What did the company do? I asked. It raised money, Celeste said. That is all it did. Raise money from investors for projects that never existed. She clicked through slides, each one a layer deeper into the structure Kurt had built. LLC registered in Delaware, March 2020. Greenwich office opened January 2021. No employees besides me and Kurt. No consultants, no contractors, no architects, no projects, no deliverables of any kind. Another click, a list of investor presentations, dates and locations, golf clubs, country clubs, private dinners at the mansion. Only activity investor presentations. Kurt promised 8 to 12% returns on pre-construction luxury developments, showed architectural renderings he purchased from stock photo websites, talked about market demand and construction timelines and exit strategies. Quentin leaned forward. How much has been raised that total? Celeste did not need to check her notes. $2.1 million over 30 months from 47 individual investors. Not $1 went to actual construction. $2.1 million, 47 investors, 0 construction projects. My son was not running a business. He was running a con. Where did the money go, I asked, though I already knew. Celeste pulled up a different spreadsheet. Color-coded expenses, red for personal, blue for operational. The screen was mostly red. Luxury car rentals billed as client transportation. $83,000 over 2 years. Golf club memberships for networking. $41,000. Parties at the mansion. Food bar service valet parking to impress potential investors. $167,000. All categorized as business development. She scrolled down. The list continued. Private school tuition for his son Tanner filed as employee education benefit, even though Tanner is not an employee. Designer clothes for investor meetings. First-class flights to conferences that did not exist. Hotel suites. Restaurant bills. And the investors, Quentin asked. They never questioned where their returns were coming from. Early investors got returns, Celeste said. Small ones, 5% here, 8% there. Enough to keep them confident in talking to their friends. But those returns were not from construction profits. They were from newer investor money. She clicked to a flowchart, money moving in circles. New investor funds paying old investor returns, the classic structure. Ponzi scheme, Quentin said. Localized to Greenwich social circles, Celeste confirmed. Country club members, business association contacts, friends of Vernon Caldwell, people who trusted Kurt because of his father-in-law's reputation. I sat there listening to my son's crimes laid out in spreadsheets and slide decks. Rosalind had worked night shifts so Kurt could go to good schools. I had signed loan guarantees so he could have opportunities. And he had used those opportunities to build a fraud operation from a house that never belonged to him. The scheme is unsustainable, Celeste said. It is already collapsing. The Desmond Wolfe loan in November was desperation. Kurt needed cash to pay returns to keep early investors quiet. When the mansion remortgage failed, he went to a private lender and pledged collateral he did not own. Trust is a strange thing. Sometimes the person acting from pure selfishness is the one you can rely on most. I looked at Celeste, at the careful documentation, at the backup files and printed records, at the woman who had kept evidence not because she cared about justice, but because she cared about survival. Did you keep a copy of all this for yourself? I asked. She met my eyes without hesitation. I am sitting here because I already did, she said. Kurt tried to destroy me once when it was convenient. He blamed me in front of investors to save himself. I will not give him a second chance. That was the moment I understood. She was not doing this for me. She was doing this for herself. She had worked in my house for 3 years, processed my son's fraudulent accounting, and now she was handing me evidence because Kurt had made an enemy when he should have kept an ally. And that was exactly why I trusted her completely. People who act from self-interest are predictable. You know what they want. You know what they will protect. Celeste wanted her reputation intact and her license secure. She would protect that evidence with everything she had. After Celeste left Quentin, and I sat in silence looking at the financial data still displayed on the screen. 2 million stolen, 47 victims. 3 years of fraud, all conducted from a house my son did not know belonged to me. Quentin's phone buzzed. He read the message, looked up at me. Your neighbor's security camera has been recording more than you know, he said. The video was silent, shot through a window from 60 feet away, but even without sound, I could see my daughter-in-law instructing someone on how to destroy me. Quentin had pulled up the file on his computer. Security camera footage from Hazel Sinclair's patio. The angle looked directly at the Greenwich Mansion's dining room window. Timestamp in the corner, January 7th, 2024, 2:47 p.m. Hazel sent this to police on January 8th, Quentin said, clicking play. Said something looked wrong. An older woman with good instincts. Police contacted me this morning. The video played. Through the window I could see Marlene sitting at the dining room table. The same table where she had hosted Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas brunches and investor meetings. Across from her sat a man in a suit briefcase, open documents spread between them. Marlene was gesturing, pointing at papers. The man was taking notes. Even from 60 feet away through glass, the body language was clear. Instructions being given, plans being made. "Who is the man with the briefcase?" I asked. "Gregory Landon," Quentin said. "Caldwell family attorney, estate planning specialist, Vernon's lawyer for 20 years. I watched Marlene lean forward, tap a document with her finger. The man nodded, wrote something down. She slid a paper across the table. He examined it. They were conducting business in my house, planning something that required legal expertise and careful documentation. "Police enhanced the footage," Quentin said. "Brought in a lip-reading consultant, standard procedure when they suspect criminal activity but have no audio." He paused the video. Marlene's mouth was open mid-word, her finger pointing at something on the table. "According to the lip reader," Quentin said carefully, Marlene said, "Declare him not mentally competent to manage property." The words sat in the air between us like poison. "They wanted to claim I was incompetent when I set up the trust 8 months ago?" I asked. "Yes," Quentin said. "If they could get a court to declare you mentally unfit at the time you created the trust would be legally void. Everything would revert to Kurt as your heir. They would have legitimate ownership of the mansion." He clicked play again. The video showed Marlene pulling more papers from a folder. Forms, templates. I could see headings even from the camera's distance: medical assessment, psychological evaluation, competency determination. They were not just stealing my house. They were trying to erase my mind, make me legally invisible, a ghost in my own life. "Conspiracy to commit fraud," Quentin said. "Forging medical records is a felony. Attempting to manipulate judicial proceedings is criminal. Both Marlene and Landon can be charged." "Will they be?" "That depends on what you want," Quentin said. "Police are waiting for your statement. You are the intended victim. Your testimony determines whether charges are filed." I watched Marlene on the screen, watched her plan my legal erasure in the house I owned. The same woman who had sprayed perfume after I left on New Year's Eve, who had told Kurt not to let me in the background of their photograph, who was married to my son and had decided I was disposable. "There is one more clip," Quentin said quietly. "Same camera, different night." He opened another file. The timestamp changed: December 31st, 2023, 10:15 p.m. New Year's Eve, after I had left, after the door had closed, after I had driven to the cemetery thinking I had nothing left. The camera showed the mansion porch, empty at first, then movement. Tanner stepped into frame, 16 years old, alone. He looked around like he was checking if anyone was watching. Then he bent down, picked something up from beside the trash bins. The pocket watch. My grandson held it in both hands, turned it over, opened the case. I could see his face in the porch light as he looked at the watch face, at the engraving inside the lid that I knew by heart: "Time honors those who use it wisely." He stood there for 30 seconds, just looking. Then he closed the case carefully, placed the watch in his jacket pocket. Ren appeared in the doorway behind him, watching. The siblings made eye contact. Neither spoke. Tanner patted his pocket once. Ren nodded. Both went inside. My grandson kept the watch, in secret ashamed, but he kept it. Sometimes the smallest things break your heart more than the largest. "Do you want to see it again?" Quentin asked. "Once was enough," I said. "I am glad it was not in the back kitchen. I meant it. Glad the watch had not been discarded with the gift bag and the scarf. Glad Tanner had felt something when he held it. Glad there was one moment on New Year's Eve that was not entirely cruel." Quentin turned off the screen, and we sat in the dark office looking at our reflections in the blank monitor. 3 violations of trust payments, $2 million in fraud, 47 victims, 1 conspiracy to forge medical incompetence, and a 16-year-old boy who secretly kept a pocket watch he was too afraid to admit he wanted. I looked at Quentin. "When do we act?" I asked. For the first time since I had met him 8 months ago, he smiled. Quentin called me on the morning of January 11th with news that my son had just scheduled his own execution and did not know it. "Your timing question," he said without greeting, "just answered itself. I was in my kitchen pouring coffee. Outside the window, Pennsylvania snow covered the street in the kind of quiet that makes 8 in the morning feel like dawn. I had been waiting 2 days since asking when we would act, waiting for Quentin to tell me the moment had arrived. "Tell me," I said. "Desmond Wolfe called your son this morning," Quentin said. "Fourth time this week, $340,000 due by January 31st, or he files a complaint with tax authorities about fraudulent collateral." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Vernon had cried 25 years ago, where Rosalind had poured coffee and given him dignity he never repaid. "Does Kurt have the money?" I asked. "Perry Consulting Group account balance, as of this morning, is negative $8,000, Quentin said. "He has nothing, used the last of his investor funds to cover November and December operating costs. No legitimate revenue, no new investors since October, and Desmond knows it." I could picture Kurt receiving that call, standing in the mansion office phone pressed to his ear trying to sound confident, while his world compressed around him like walls closing in. What did Kurt say? According to Desmond, he promised payment by the deadline, asked for patience, said he had a plan. "Does he?" "He does now," Quentin said. "Marlene suggested a solution this morning. I heard about it 10 minutes ago through sources at the country club." I waited. "A fundraiser," Quentin said. "At the mansion. Invite current investors and new prospects. Use the house as proof of success. Tout family legacy and Greenwich address. Pitch a new luxury development project in Fairfield County. Raise quick cash. Desperation is predictable. A drowning man always surfaces in the same place right where you are waiting with the net." "He agreed," I asked. "Within minutes," Quentin said. "He has no other options. When you are drowning, you grab whatever floats by, even if it is a stone dressed as wood." I stood, walked to the window, watched snow fall on the quiet street. In Greenwich, Kurt was planning a party, planning to use my house to defraud more people, planning to stand before investors and promise returns he could never deliver. "When is the fundraiser?" I asked. "That is what I am calling about," Quentin said. His voice changed, became something close to satisfaction. "January 25th, 2 weeks from today. 40 guests confirmed, champagne reception, catered dinner, live music. He is calling it an investor appreciation event with new opportunity presentation. January 25th, 14 days away. The date sat in my mind like a destination I had been driving toward without knowing the address. "There is something you should know," Quentin said, "about Desmond Wolfe." "Tell me." "There is something you should know about Desmond Wolfe," Quentin said. "Tell me." "Wolfe came to my office 3 weeks ago. He had done his research after Kurt failed to repay him, hired his own attorney to investigate the collateral. His attorney found the trust ownership quickly. It is public record if you know where to look. Wolfe was furious. He had been defrauded." Quentin paused. "He asked if I knew who owned the property. I told him I represented the trust. He asked if the owner intended to act. I told him the owner was considering his options. So, Wolfe is acting on his own behalf," I said. "Entirely," Quentin confirmed. "His calls, his demands, his January 31st deadline, all genuine. He wants his $340,000 back, and he is not patient. I simply informed him that his best chance of recovery was allowing the legal process to run its course." Quentin's voice stayed level. "I did not orchestrate anything. I just made sure a real creditor understood the full picture. And when this ends, he will be made whole from the trust assets before any other distribution. His cooperation is in his own interest. That is the only kind of cooperation worth counting on. 2 weeks to raise money, impress investors, save himself. He will go all in, spare no expense, use every bit of the mansion's prestige, because he believes this event will save him." "When it will destroy him," I said. Quentin said nothing, did not need to. I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall. January 11th, circled in red, January 25th. 14 days until my son stood in a house he did not own, before 40 guests he hoped to defraud, asking for money to save himself from debts he could never pay. "The event starts at 7, Quentin said. "Cocktails and networking until 8, dinner at 8:30. Kurt's presentation scheduled for 9:15. He will stand before everyone, use the mansion as his proof of credibility, and ask for their money. And we arrive when—" "That depends on what you want," Quentin said. "Do you want him to finish his pitch first? Let the investors commit verbally before we reveal the truth. Maximum humiliation requires maximum investment." I thought about Rosalind working night shifts, thought about Vernon calling me delivery service, Thought about Kurt giving me less than it cost in gas to visit him. Thought about Marlene spraying perfume to erase my presence. Let him finish, I said. Let him ask for their money. Let them believe him. Then we tell them who owns the house they are standing in. Then we wait, Quentin said. 14 days. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my Pennsylvania house looking at the calendar. 14 days until January 25th. 14 days until my son stood in a house he did not own and learned that the father he had discarded was the one holding every card. But first I had to make sure that when the house was taken from Kurt, his children would not be left with nothing. The question Quentin asked me in the private conference room was the one I had been avoiding for 2 weeks. What happens to your grandchildren when you take their home? I had driven to Greenwich that morning to finalize the timing for January 25th, to discuss logistics and legal filings and exactly how the ownership reveal would unfold. But Quentin had other questions, harder questions, the kind that have no good answers. If we act on January 25th, he said, closing the conference room door behind us, your grandchildren lose their home that night. Ren is 9 years old. Tanner is 16. Neither committed fraud. I know, I said. So we have a choice to make, Quentin said, sitting across from me at the long table. Justice for Rosalind's legacy or protection for her great-grandchildren. I do not see how we get both. The weight of that statement sat between us, like a third person in the room. I had thought about this, had tried to avoid thinking about it, had circled around it like a wound I did not want to touch. Ren was 9, the same age Kurt had been when Rosalind started working night shifts at the library. Tanner was 16, old enough to understand when his world collapsed, old enough to remember the grandfather who caused it. If I reclaim the mansion, I said slowly, where do they go? Wherever Kurt and Marlene can afford, Quentin said, which will not be Greenwich, probably not Connecticut. They will lose their school district, their friends, their bedrooms, everything familiar. I looked out the window at the winter sky, gray clouds hanging low over the town, where my son had built a life on fraud and my grandchildren had built a life on innocence. They did not choose their parents, Abiscaus, I said. No, Quentin agreed. They did not. What is justice worth if it destroys the innocent along with the guilty? I thought about Rosalind's last question in the hospital. Not last words, last question. The thing that mattered most to her when nothing else did. Has Kurt had dinner yet? She had asked about her son being fed, being safe, being taken care of. Even when she should have been thinking about herself, about the pain about the end coming too fast, she worried about whether Kurt had eaten. What would she ask about her grandchildren now? Rosalind worked nights for 6 years. I said, so Kurt could go to a good school, not because he deserved it, because he was the next generation, because that is what you do for children you sacrifice so they have chances you never had. Quentin waited. She would ask about her grandchildren before she asked about justice, I said. And I know what she would want me to do. Before I tell you the decision I made that day, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think I should have stopped here, or B, if you think there was another way. This next part includes some dramatized details to convey the emotional weight of that choice. I want to establish a separate trust, I said, irrevocable for Ren and Tanner, independent of anything that happens to Kurt or Marlene. Quentin pulled out his legal pad, started taking notes. Full tuition. I continued. Any college or university they choose. Housing stipend of $2,000 per month until they turn 21. You as trustee. Kurt and Marlene cannot access. It cannot control. It cannot touch a single dollar. All funded how? Rosalind Foundation assets, I said. $150,000 immediate. Remainder vested over time as needed. The children will not pay for their parents' sins, but they will know who protected them when their parents could not. Quentin wrote silently. When he looked up, his expression was careful. You understand what this means, he said. Establishing a competing trust for his children while you are publicly destroying him, Kurt will see this as theft. Theft of his children's loyalty, their future, their relationship with him. He might never contact you again. I sat with that truth, let it settle. He has not contacted me in a long time, I said quietly. Every Sunday call was me calling him. Every visit was me driving 4 hours to stand on his porch. It took me years to realize he was already gone. Are you certain? I could not save my son, but I could save my son's children. Sometimes that is all a grandfather can do. I am protecting Rosalind's legacy, I said. That includes her great-grandchildren, Kurt made his choices, made them for years. This is me making mine. Quentin nodded once, started drafting the framework on his pad. Trust structure, funding mechanisms, vesting schedules. The legal architecture that would protect two children from their parents' collapse. The trust activates when? He asked. January 26th, I said. The day after we take the house. I want them to wake up homeless and learn the same day that their grandfather secured their future. Let them understand the difference between parents who destroy and grandparents who build. Quentin looked at me across the table. Kurt might never contact you again, he said. I thought about New Year's Eve, about the door that opened 6 inches, about $40 in an envelope and perfume spray erasing my presence, about Sunday phone calls that went to voicemail and Christmas invitations that never came. He has not in a long time, I said. Took me years to realize. Quentin began drafting the grandchildren's trust documents that afternoon, while I drove back to Pennsylvania in the January cold. 12 days until the fundraiser. 12 days until Kurt stood before 40 guests in a house secured by his father's invisible hand, asking for money to save himself from debts his father had already decided to call due. In Greenwich, Marlene was making decisions that would add one more violation to the file Quentin was building. Quentin called on the afternoon of January 16th to tell me my daughter-in-law was attempting to sell furniture from a house she did not own, and thought I might find that amusing. Your daughter-in-law is trying to sell your furniture, he said without preamble. I was sitting at my kitchen table with tax documents spread in front of me. January in Pennsylvania, the kind of gray afternoon that makes you turn on lights at 3 o'clock. Which furniture? I asked. All of it, Quentin said, or as much as she can move before the fundraiser. She has been busy. He explained. Between January 14th and 15th, Marlene had photographed items throughout the mansion. The antique dining table, landscape paintings in the hallway, porcelain vases, decorative mirrors, things that looked expensive and probably were back when someone who actually owned them had purchased them. She contacted 3 auction houses, Quentin said. Christie's and Greenwich Sotheby's and a local estate sale company. Offered the items for quick sale delivery by January 20th. Said she needed cash before an important event. The fundraiser, I said. She wants the house to look successful, Quentin confirmed. But she also wants money, probably to pay some of the vendors, make deposits, create the impression of solvency. The desperate always try to look wealthy right before they collapse. I thought about Marlene walking through the mansion with her phone, photographing my property, pricing it in her head, making lists, calling auction houses, planning sales. Does she know those items belong to the trust? I asked. She believes Kurt owns the house and everything in it, Quentin said. She has no idea she is attempting to sell property that legally belongs to you. Every photograph she sent to those auction houses is evidence of intent. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. Trust Deed Clause 7. Quentin continued his voice, taking on the precise tone lawyers use when quoting documents, explicitly prohibits sale, transfer, or encumbrance of any property within the residence while the trust remains active. Marlene's auction house contacts constitute attempted sale. 4th violation. 4 violations. $2 million in fraud. 1 conspiracy. And now she was trying to sell my $12 vase. What are the penalties for 4 violations? I asked. Accelerated default, Quentin said. Additional damages, but that is civil. There is also criminal. He paused. I heard papers rustling on his end of the phone. Sheriff Floyd Brooks called this morning, he said. He reviewed the conspiracy video from Hazel Sinclair's camera, the one showing Marlene and Gregory Landon discussing forged medical incompetence documents. And sufficient evidence for criminal prosecution, Quentin said. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted falsification of medical records to manipulate judicial proceedings. Both Marlene and Gregory Landon can be charged. I sat very still. Civil violations and criminal charges, trust defaults and felony prosecution, everything converging at once. When will they be arrested? I asked. That is what I want to talk to you about, Quentin said. I asked Sheriff Brooks to delay filing criminal charges until January 25th. I understood immediately. All evidence at once, I said. 4 trust violations. Quentin confirmed. $2.1 million in investor fraud, conspiracy to forge medical documents, attempted sale of trust property, civil and criminal, presented simultaneously at the fundraiser for maximum public impact. Sheriff Brooks agreed. He said justice is better served with a complete case than piecemeal prosecution. Everything timed, everything coordinated, the net closing from all sides at once. "There is one more thing," Quentin said, and I heard something in his voice that might have been amusement. "Do you remember the porcelain vase on the fireplace mantel, blue and white, Chinese pattern?" I closed my eyes, saw it immediately. The vase Rosalind had brought home from a flea market in 1987, 37 years ago. We had been married 8 years. She had paid $12 and been so pleased with herself. Marlene specifically contacted Christie's about that vase, Quentin said. Described it as a valuable antique, 18th century export porcelain, asked for authentication and appraisal. I laughed. For the first time since New Year's Eve, I laughed until my chest hurt. Rosalind would have laughed too. "She thinks it is worth thousands," I said between laughs. "She sent photographs," Quentin said. Christie's replied that they would need to examine it in person, but preliminary assessment suggests 20th century reproduction, minimal value. $12, I said. Rosalind bought it for $12 at a flea market. She liked the pattern, said it matched the kitchen curtains we had then. The laughter felt strange, not joyful exactly, just the absurdity of it. Marlene photographing a $12 vase, calling an auction house, describing it with terms she probably found on the internet, believing it was valuable because it sat on a fireplace mantel in a mansion, not knowing the mansion was not hers, not knowing the vase was not hers, not knowing anything was hers. 9 days, Quentin said, after the laughter faded. 9 days until January 25th. Everything is ready, evidence compiled, charges prepared, timing coordinated. We are just waiting for Kurt to build his stage. "And then we use it," I said. "And then we use it," Quentin agreed. After I stopped laughing, Quentin said something that made the amusement fade. "Your son called my office this morning," he said quietly. "Asked if I handle estate planning. He wants to meet with me about protecting assets." The world went very still. "He does not know," I said, not a question. "He does not know I'm already your attorney," Quentin confirmed. "He is coming to me for help protecting himself from the debts that are crushing him. He does not realize I am the one who arranged those debts in the first place. Kurt was coming to me, not knowing who I had already become. 7 days before the fundraiser, Kurt appeared at my door without warning. I saw his car first, through the kitchen window pulling into my driveway at 4:20 on a Thursday afternoon. Expensive sedan, black, the kind that costs more than my annual pension. He sat behind the wheel for 30 seconds before getting out, like he was gathering courage. I did not go to the door, just waited, watched him walk up my front steps, watched him pause before knocking, watched him force his shoulders back, put on the smile I had seen him use at investor meetings, when the numbers were bad, but the performance had to be good. When I opened the door, he looked tired, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, which was unusual for him. Kurt wore suits, Kurt wore success, but today he wore worry badly disguised as contrition. "Can we start over?" he said. Not hello, not sorry for showing up unannounced, just a question designed to test whether I knew what he had been doing, whether I had heard from Quentin, whether the father standing in the doorway understood that the son on the porch was drowning. I saw through it completely, the conciliatory tone, the casual close meant to suggest vulnerability, the phrase chosen carefully to sound like reconciliation while actually fishing for information. But I also saw something else, fear. Real fear underneath the performance. Kurt was terrified I had changed something, done something, moved some piece on a board he thought he controlled. "Come in," I said. "I'll make tea." Relief flickered across his face. Not happiness, just relief that the door was opening instead of closing. He followed me to the kitchen, the same kitchen where Vernon Caldwell had sat 25 years ago, crying over bankruptcy, where Rosalind had poured coffee and given dignity to a man who would later call me delivery service. The table had witnessed confessions before. It would witness one more goodbye. I filled the kettle, pulled down the china Rosalind had bought in 1982. The cups we used for special occasions that had become everyday cups after she died, because I could not bear to leave them unused. Kurt sat, looked around like he was seeing the kitchen for the first time in years. Maybe he was. I could not remember the last time he had been inside this house. 5 years, 6. "The house looks good," he said. "You've been taking care of it." "It's been well maintained," I said. Passive voice, deliberate, not claiming credit, not giving him anything to use. The kettle whistled. I poured, added milk to mine. Kurt took 3 sugars. He had not taken sugar as a child. Rosalind used to say he drank his tea like water, so pure he could taste the leaves. Now he needed sweetness to make it palatable. I've been thinking about Mom lately, Kurt said. What she would want. Using Rosalind's memory, using her as leverage, as if invoking her name would create obligation. Have you, I said, statement not question, refusing to engage. Kurt's phone buzzed on the table, twice. He glanced at it but did not pick it up. Probably Marlene, probably Gregory. Probably someone else whose panic was leaking into his afternoon. Silence settled between us. Not the comfortable silence of people who understand each other. The final silence of people who have nothing left to say. I drank my tea and watched my son across the table, and saw a stranger wearing a face I had once memorized. Every feature familiar, every expression foreign. When Kurt was 7 years old, we sat at this same table, and he asked me a question. He had learned about adoption at school that day. Learned that some children had different parents than the ones who raised them. Will you always be my dad? He had asked, worried. Always, I had told him. Now that same boy, 42 years old, wearing expensive clothes, carrying debts he could not name, sat across from me, and I did not recognize him at all. An hour passed. Kurt made small talk about work, about the weather, about nothing that mattered. I responded with words that filled space but carried no weight. Finally he stood, hesitated in the kitchen doorway, like there was something he wanted to say but could not find the words. Are you all right, Father? He asked. First time he had called me father in years. Not dad, not the old man. Father, formal, distant, but still the word. I'm fine, I said, both true and false. Fine because the plan was in motion, not fine because I was losing my son. Both truths living in the same breath. Kurt waited, wanted more. I offered nothing. We walked to the front door, his hand on the doorknob. One last pause, one last chance for something neither of us could name. Then he left. The door closed quietly. No slam, no drama, just the soft click of a lock finding its place. I watched through the window as he got in his car, watched the taillights disappear down the street into the January darkness. A relationship ends twice, first when it dies, second when someone finally admits it is dead. Today was the admission. 7 days from now would be the burial. I walked back to the kitchen. The teacups sat on the table, steam long gone. One cup with a faint mark from my chapped lips, the other barely touched. Then I saw it, an envelope on the table where Kurt had been sitting, my name written on the outside in his handwriting, inside a check for $500, a note for house repairs. Not an apology, not an explanation, a transaction. Kurt trying to buy absolution with money he did not have to spend on repairs I did not need. I tore the check in half, then in half again. I placed all 4 pieces in my desk drawer next to Rosalind's letters. In 7 days, Kurt would learn some things cannot be purchased. Not forgiveness, not legacy, and certainly not the Rosalind Perry Foundation. Kurt's voice carried through the Greenwich mansion like he owned every inch of marble beneath the crystal chandeliers. 7 days had passed since he sat in my kitchen drinking tea with 3 sugars and leaving a check I tore in half. 7 days since I told him I was fine and meant it in ways he would never understand. Now, on the night of January 25th, the lessons he needed to learn were waiting in a manila envelope on my passenger seat. But first, I had to let him perform. Inside the mansion, the fundraiser was everything Marlene had promised it would be. 43 investors in evening attire, champagne flutes catching light from chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. A jazz quartet in the corner, playing music expensive enough to sound like background. The kind of party that announced success before anyone opened their mouth. Marlene worked the foyer in a designer gown, greeting guests like she was hosting royalty. Every smile calculated, every air kiss perfectly positioned. She moved through the crowd, touching elbows and laughing at jokes that were not funny, performing the role of successful wife in successful house married to successful man. Vernon Caldwell stood near the fireplace telling a small group about Kurt's business acumen. His voice carried the authority of a man who had built companies and forgotten the people who saved him from losing them. My son-in-law understands real estate like his father did, Vernon said, gesturing with his scotch glass. It's in the blood. The irony would have made me laugh if I were not sitting in a car 300 feet away watching through windows that glowed with lies. Gail Caldwell circulated with champagne bottles, keeping glasses full, keeping investors comfortable. Tanner moved through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, 16 years old, and playing waiter in his own house. Or what he thought was his house. Upstairs, barely visible through a second-floor window, I could see Wren, 9 years old, standing at the top of the stairs, wearing something around her neck. Even from this distance, even in the dark, I recognized it. The navy wool scarf, Rosalind's scarf. The one she had started knitting before cancer took her hands. The one I had finished and given to Kurt on New Year's Eve. The one Tanner had mocked in front of guests. Wren was wearing it tonight. At 7:30, Kurt began his presentation. I could not hear the words from where I sat, but Quentin had obtained a copy of Kurt's investor presentation 3 days earlier through Celeste's documentation. I had read every slide twice on the drive up from Pennsylvania. I knew the script by heart, had heard versions of them before, had watched him practice the confidence that came from believing your own lies. Yet thank you for coming tonight, the script read. I could picture him saying it. This house represents what I want to show you, legacy built on sound asset management. The house that was not his, the legacy that belonged to a woman he invoked but did not honor. The asset he managed without knowing who actually owned it. Douglas Winters, mid-50s lead investor from a Hartford private equity firm, stood front and center taking notes. I had researched every person on the guest list. Knew their net worth, their investment history, their risk tolerance. Winters was the biggest fish, the one Kurt needed most. This property came into my care through my late mother-in-law's estate, slide 4, word for word. And that part was technically true. Rosalind's will had left me everything, and I had used that everything to save Kurt from foreclosure without him knowing. I turned family sentiment into strategic asset. Family sentiment, my wife's memory reduced to real estate jargon. 43 people in that room believed everything Kurt said. In 70 minutes, 43 people would learn what belief costs. By now, he would be moving into the Arizona pitch slide 7, the one with the desert renderings purchased from a stock photo website. The commercial property development that existed only in PowerPoint, slides purchased from stock photo websites. The 18-month return on investment that would never materialize because the investment would never be made. $2 million he needed from people who trusted him because of the house he stood in. The house I owned. I sat in the rental car, not my pickup truck, something anonymous, and watched the performance through windows that framed each lie in golden light. The manila envelope sat on the passenger seat. Trust documents, ownership papers. The truth typed in legal language that could not be misunderstood. My phone showed 8:50 p.m. The fundraiser was scheduled until 10. 70 minutes left. Quentin had suggested I arrive at 9:15, after Kurt finished his pitch, after the investors verbally committed, after the trap closed completely. The maximum impact, Quentin had said. Maximum witnesses. I had agreed, not because I wanted spectacle, because I wanted completeness. Wanted every person in that room to hear Kurt ask for their money and then learn exactly whose house he was asking from. The mansion glowed like a stage set, beautiful, expensive, and about to strike. Inside, Kurt would be closing now, making the final ask, telling them about opportunity and returns and trust, telling them to believe in him because look at this house, look at this life, look at this proof. Not knowing the proof belonged to his father. Not knowing the father he had given $40 on New Year's Eve was about to give him the bill for 42 years of disappointment. I thought about Rosalind, about 6 years of night shifts, about sandwich crusts she cut off for a son who grew up to forget her sacrifice, about her last question in the hospital, asking if Kurt had eaten dinner. She had worried about him until the moment she could not worry anymore. Now I would finish what she started, not revenge, protection. Protection of her legacy from the son who would spend it without understanding what it cost. 70 minutes. Let him finish the pitch. Let the investors commit. Then they would learn what I had learned. That Kurt's word meant nothing. That the house was never his. That the father he discarded was the one who owned everything. I checked my watch one last time. 8:50 p.m. 70 minutes until Kurt's world ended. I placed the manila envelope containing the trust documents on the passenger seat and opened the car door. The night air smelled like January and justice. I stepped through the front door of my own house like a stranger. No one looked up. The foyer buzzed with conversation investors, clutching cocktails admiring the Venetian chandelier Rosalind had chosen in 2019. A woman in pearls laughed at something her companion said, gesturing toward the crown molding. I recognized her voice from the presentation earlier. She had no idea the man who owned every inch of this house was standing 3 feet away. I kept my expression neutral, my movements unhurried. The trust documents were folded in my inner jacket pocket. My phone held photographs of every room, every piece of furniture Rosalind had selected. I had waited 7 months for this moment. I could wait 5 more minutes. The living room sprawled to my left, filled with clusters of well-dressed strangers. Vernon stood near the fireplace, nodding along to something a silver-haired man was saying. My father-in-law looked distinguished in his navy suit, playing the role of supportive family patriarch. He didn't glance my direction. Marlene stood beside the grand piano, her champagne flute tilted just so her smile practiced and warm. She was explaining something about the acoustics of the room. Neither of them recognized me. I moved deeper into the house, past the dining room, where Rosalind and I had hosted Thanksgiving 3 years running. The table was set with appetizers now, bruschetta shrimp, cocktail artisan cheese. A young server offered me a glass of wine. I declined with a slight shake of my head and kept walking. The hallway to the study still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets Rosalind had placed in every closet. I wondered if Kurt even noticed. I wondered if he'd thrown them away, or if they'd simply faded one more ghost of the woman who built this home. Voices drifted from upstairs, Kurt's voice confident and commanding, punctuated by the occasional, appreciative murmur from his audience. He was in the second-floor sitting room, the one Rosalind had used for her book club. I pictured him there, standing beside the bay window, gesturing toward his presentation slides while 43 investors imagined their Arizona profits. I started up the staircase. The marble steps were cool beneath my shoes. Rosalind had insisted on Carrara marble, for this staircase had argued with the contractor for 3 weeks about the vein pattern. She'd won. She always won when it mattered. Halfway up I saw her. Wren sat on the landing cross-legged, her small frame tucked against the balustrade. She wore a white dress with blue flowers too formal for a 9-year-old on a Thursday night. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid. Around her neck, draped like a treasured shawl, was Rosalind's navy scarf. I stopped climbing. Wren's eyes met mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The noise from downstairs faded into background static. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the confident pitch of strangers selling my wife's dream. All of it disappeared. Wren didn't smile, didn't wave. She simply looked at me with those solemn, knowing eyes, and slowly, deliberately, her fingers touched the edge of the scarf. She mouthed 4 words. "Rosalind will be pleased." My throat tightened. I hadn't expected this. Hadn't prepared for the one person in this house who still remembered what mattered. Wren was 9 years old, caught in the middle of her father's scheme, and her grandparents' complicity, and somehow she was the only one who understood. I gave her a single nod. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed. She tucked the scarf closer around her shoulders and looked away back toward the upstairs hallway where her father's voice continued its polished performance. I resumed climbing. The second floor was quieter. A few investors lingered near the bathroom, checking their phones. One man stood by the hall table examining a framed photograph of Stanley's wedding. I didn't recognize him. I didn't care. The door to the sitting room stood open, spilling warm light into the corridor. I could see shadows moving inside, Kurt pacing as he spoke. Someone shifting in their chair, the flicker of a projection screen. I paused outside the doorway. Inside, Kurt was saying something about ROI, projections, his voice smooth and practiced. Someone asked a question about zoning regulations. Kurt laughed, assured them his team had already secured the necessary variances. Another lie delivered with the same confidence he'd used at Christmas dinner. I thought about Rosalind's face the last time we'd stood in this room together. She'd been showing me fabric samples for new curtains, holding swatches up to the window light, asking my opinion, even though she'd already decided. I'd kissed her forehead and told her whatever she chose would be perfect. She'd smiled. "You always say that." Because it's always true. The curtains she'd chosen were still hanging, sage green linen, simple and elegant. Kurt probably didn't even notice them. I reached into my jacket and touched the folded trust documents. The paper was warm from being close to my chest. Every clause, every provision, every carefully worded legal protection Rosalind and I had put in place to prevent exactly this scenario. Kurt thought he was untouchable, thought his father-in-law's connections and his mother-in-law's social polish could smooth over fraud and betrayal, thought 43 investors and a polished presentation could transform stolen property into legitimate profit. He was wrong. I stepped into the doorway. The room fell silent. 43 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Kurt froze mid-gesture, his hand still raised toward the projection screen, showing Arizona desert landscapes and profit margin graphs. For 3 full seconds, no one spoke. Then Kurt's face shifted, confusion melting into recognition. Recognition hardening into something that looked almost like fear. "Arthur," he said. His voice was steady, but his fingers curled into a fist at his side. "I didn't realize you were invited." I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "I own the house," I said quietly. "I don't need an invitation." Kurt's voice died mid-word. He'd been gesturing toward the projection screen, explaining Arizona ROI to Douglas Winters, when his eyes found mine across the room. The sentence hung unfinished in the air. His hand froze mid-gesture. I stood in the doorway, manila envelope under my arm, watching 43 investors turn to see what had stopped their host mid-pitch. 43 seconds. That's how long it took for Kurt to remember how to breathe. "Mr. Perry." Douglas Winters leaned forward, expensive watch catching the chandelier light. "You were saying about the ROI." Kurt didn't answer. He stared at me like I was a ghost. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. I didn't move, didn't smile, just held his gaze and waited. The room rustled with whispers. The air smelled like expensive cologne and champagne with an undertone of nervous sweat. A woman near the fireplace murmured something. Someone coughed. The projection screen flickered to the next slide, profit margins that no longer mattered. Kurt found his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll excuse me for just one moment." He stepped down from the platform, expression shifting from shock to something harder. "There's been a misunderstanding." He crossed toward me, smile returning as he moved through the crowd. Professional, apologetic. The performance of a man in control. But I saw his jaw clench, the muscle jumping in his cheek. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough the investors couldn't hear, far enough to maintain civility. "You weren't invited." His voice was low and tight. "You need to leave, now." I met his eyes. In the low light, they were the same shade as Rosalind's gray-green, like the ocean before a storm. The only thing he'd inherited from her that mattered. "You don't need to invite me," I said. My voice was calm, clear, loud enough the first row heard. "This is my house." The room went silent. Kurt laughed, nervous, too loud, edged with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" He turned, slightly playing to his audience. "Dad, you're confused. This house belonged to Rosalind's estate, and after she... It was never Rosalind's." I kept my voice level. The words tasted like copper in my mouth. "She lived here. She decorated it. She chose every piece of furniture, every curtain, every light fixture. But the deed was always in my name. The trust documents prove it." I lifted the manila envelope slightly. Every eye in the room tracked it. Kurt's smile faltered. "That's not you don't." He stopped, regrouped. "I don't know what someone told you, but the probate attorney was very clear. The property transferred to me through Rosalind's will. Rosalind never owned it." 5 words. "This is my house." 5 words to end 42 years of fatherhood. Marlene appeared at Kurt's elbow, champagne flute forgotten in her hand. She looked between us, confusion creasing her features. "Arthur, what are you doing here?" Behind her, Vernon pushed through the crowd. "What's going on?" His eyes landed on me, narrowed. "Who is this man?" Marlene touched his arm. "That's Kurt's father. I don't understand why he's..." "Ask Quentin," I said. Kurt's face went still. "What?" "Quentin Finch, your probate attorney." I watched his expression. "Or, rather, the attorney you tried to contact 3 weeks ago about asset protection. The one who never returned your call." The color started draining from Kurt's face. "He couldn't return your call," I continued. "Conflict of interest. He's been my estate attorney since 2019. You can rehearse revenge for weeks, plan every word, choreograph every moment. You can practice your lines until they're smooth as polished stone. But nothing prepares you for watching your son's face when he realizes he's lost everything." Kurt's mouth moved soundlessly. His eyes darted to the manila envelope, to my face, to the crowd watching our family drama unfold. "You're lying." But his voice had no conviction. "This is, you can't just..." I gestured toward the front window. Through the curtains, headlights swept the driveway. "My attorney will explain," I said. "He's here now." Kurt turned toward the window. I watched him track the car as it stopped near the entrance. Watched him register the sleek black sedan, the professional bearing of the man climbing out. "Quentin Finch," he whispered, his voice hollow. "You! That's why he never called me back." The pieces were falling into place. I could see it happening. The unanswered calls, the polite deferrals, the careful silence that had seemed like professional discretion. He'd thought Quentin was too busy for his case. He'd never imagined the lawyer was already working for the other side. Vernon stepped forward, his hand heavy on Kurt's shoulder. "Son, what is he talking about? What's going on?" Kurt didn't answer. He stared through the window at Quentin Finch's car, watching the attorney gather a leather document folder from the passenger seat. His face cycled through emotions too quickly to track confusion, melting into comprehension, hardening into fear, dissolving into something like despair. Douglas Winters cleared his throat. "Mr. Perry, is this presentation continuing?" No one answered. The front door opened. Footsteps crossed the marble foyer, measured, professional, unhurried. Quentin Finch appeared in the doorway, mid-50s and silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Kurt's projection equipment. He'd been my estate attorney since Rosalind and I first set up the trust, the man who'd structured every protection we'd built into our legacy. He nodded to me, then let his gaze sweep the room full of frozen investors. "Good evening," he said, his voice carried easily. "I apologize for the interruption." Kurt's face changed 3 colors in 4 seconds, confusion to fear to something close to understanding. Quentin Finch's leather folder clicked open. The only sound in the room was 40 investors holding their breath. Sheriff Floyd Brooks walked through the door in full uniform, 2 deputies behind him, and 40 investors understood this was not a social visit. Quentin stepped to the center of the room, folder open in his hands. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Legal owner of this property, Rosalind Perry Foundation Trust, established January 15th, 2024. Trustee Arthur Perry. Original deed transferred from Arthur Perry's sole ownership, dated 1999. Kurt's face went white. "That's impossible. The will, your mother's will left the house to Arthur Perry with full testamentary authority. He exercised that authority 3 weeks ago." Quentin looked up, met Kurt's eyes. "Kurt Perry holds no ownership interest in this property and never has." The room erupted in whispers. Douglas Winters stood gathering his coat. 2 other investors followed his lead. Marlene stepped forward, her voice sharp. "This is insane. You can't just, we've been living here for 7 months." The probate attorney said, "The probate attorney processed the will correctly. The will gave the property to Arthur. What Arthur chose to do with it was entirely his decision." Quentin turned the page. On January 18th, 2024, Arthur Perry, acting as trustee, issued a conditional lease to Kurt and Marlene Perry, rent $1 per month. Conditions: no commercial use, no third-party events, no modifications to the property monthly financial disclosure. Kurt's jaw clenched. I watched him understand. 4 violations documented, commercial fundraising event held tonight. Third-party investors hosted without authorization. Structural modifications to the second floor office. Financial disclosure refused December 20th, January 5th, and January 20th. Quentin closed that section of the folder. Notice of lease termination was served at 9:10 p.m. this evening. Formal eviction proceedings will be filed with Hartford Superior Court tomorrow morning. Under Connecticut law, you will receive the full statutory notice period to vacate, but that process begins tonight, and it will not stop. Marlene's champagne flute slipped from her hand. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp and final. The smell of spilled wine rose between us, sweet and acidic. No one moved to clean it. The front door opened again. A woman in her late 30s entered carrying a slim briefcase. She wore a gray suit and the flat professional expression of someone who'd seen too much fraud. Investigator Celeste Hampton, Connecticut Financial Crimes Unit. Her eyes scanned the room, landed on Kurt. "Mr. Perry, I need to speak with you regarding your Arizona commercial development project." Kurt's voice came out strangled. "I don't know what this isn't the time. We have evidence of material misrepresentation to investors." Celeste opened her briefcase, pulled out a folder marked with official seals. Investment solicitation documents claiming secured property rights, guaranteed returns, and city zoning approval. All 3 claims appear to be fraudulent. Several individuals in this room may be potential victims. Douglas Winters moved towards Celeste. "I invested $200,000 based on those property guarantees. I'll need to take your statement." She looked at Floyd Brooks. "Sheriff, I'm going to need assistance with witness interviews. Floyd nodded. His deputies began guiding investors toward the dining room, organizing them, separating them from the family destruction unfolding in the main room. Celesta set a laptop on the side table. I also have evidence related to attempted medical fraud. She opened a video file. This footage was recorded December 28, 2023 by building security at Hartford Medical Associates. The screen showed Marlene sitting at a desk, paperwork spread before her. The angle was clear enough to see what she was doing, forging signatures, filling out forms marked competency assessment and legal guardian application. The room went silent. Even the investors in the dining room stopped talking. That was... Marlene's voice cracked. The color had drained from her face. I was protecting family interests. Arthur wasn't capable of... Ma'am, Floyd Brooks said, stepping forward. His voice was gentle but immovable. Forging medical documents is felony fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Marlene looked at Vernon. Vernon looked at the floor. 3 weeks of planning, 40 minutes of revelation, 42 years of fatherhood, ending in a conference room turned crime scene. Kurt stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed world collapse. I wondered if he understood yet, if he'd grasped the full scope of what was happening. Quentin wasn't finished. He pulled another document from the folder, this one yellowed with age, the paper thick with official seals. One more item for the record. He turned to Vernon Caldwell, who stood near the fireplace, still silent, still stunned. Loan guarantee dated March 12, 1999. Arthur Perry personally guaranteed $890,000 to Wells Fargo Commercial Banking, securing the debt of Caldwell Manufacturing during Chapter 7 bankruptcy proceedings. Vernon's head snapped up. The guarantee saved Caldwell Manufacturing from liquidation, enabled restructuring. The loan was repaid to the bank in 2004. Quentin's voice stayed level. The guarantee to Arthur Perry was never repaid, never acknowledged, never mentioned. The air tasted like ash in my mouth. 25 years of silence laid bare in a single paragraph. Vernon stared at me across the room. No words, just recognition and something that might have been shame. You called me delivery service, I said quietly. The words weren't for anyone else. Just him. Christmas Eve, you asked if I'd brought the appetizers. Gail touched Vernon's arm. We should go. Vernon didn't move, didn't speak, just kept staring as if seeing me for the first time in decades. Marlene turned on Kurt, her voice vicious. This is your fault. You said he was senile. You said he'd never... I didn't know. Kurt's voice broke. How was I supposed to know he... You never asked, I said. The room emptied like water from a broken vessel, investors first gathering coats and phones, avoiding eye contact. Then Celeste Hampton, with her evidence files and witness list. Then Floyd Brooks and his deputies promising to return tomorrow for formal statements. Vernon left without looking back, Gail guiding him toward the door. Marlene followed her heels, clicking on marble, the sound sharp and accusing. Tanner stood in the hallway, watching his father's world end. He met my eyes for a moment, something there I couldn't read, then turned and left. The last investor closed the door behind him. Kurt stood in the center of the empty room, surrounded by abandoned champagne glasses and scattered evidence folders. The projection screen still glowed behind him, frozen on Arizona desert landscapes that would never see development. He looked smaller than his 42 years, his shoulders curved inward, his hands hanging loose at his sides. For the first time since he was 8 years old, I saw my son instead of the stranger who replaced him. But it was too late for both of us. 30 days passed without my setting foot in Greenwich, and Quentin's Friday call came like a weather report. They've finished moving out, he said. I stood at my Pennsylvania kitchen window, watching February rain turn the backyard into mud. 30 days since the fundraiser. 30 days since I'd seen Kurt's face change from shock to comprehension to something that looked like grief. When I asked, last Sunday, Kurt took a furnished studio in Hartford. Marlene's back with Vernon and Gail in Stamford. They cleared everything out by noon. The rain streaked down the glass. I'd received weekly updates, lawyers coordinating the move. Timelines negotiated the systematic dismantling of Kurt's life in my house. I'd listened to every report from 200 miles away. Never went to watch them leave. Gave them that dignity at least. Did Kurt say anything? I asked. Leave anything? He left the keys on the kitchen counter. Nothing else. Nothing else, no note, no explanation, no apology. Just keys on granite and an empty house. Vernon, they're selling assets. The exposure from your loan guarantees several business partners are reevaluating relationships, keeping low profile. I could picture it. Vernon Caldwell, distinguished manufacturer, quietly withdrawing from boards and charity committees. The man who'd called me delivery service now, explaining why he'd never mentioned the debt. And Marlene, negotiating a plea arrangement on the forgery charges. Celeste Hampton's fraud case against Kurt is moving forward trial by summer. The rain hammered against the roof, steady and relentless. I'd won, reclaimed my house, exposed the fraud, revealed the betrayals. Done exactly what I'd set out to do in January. So, why did victory taste like ashes? I'm driving up tomorrow, I said. I need to see it. Quentin didn't ask why, just said he'd meet me there at 10. The mansion looked smaller in daylight. I stood in the circular driveway Saturday morning, keys in my hand. The same keys Kurt had left on the counter, now returned to their rightful owner. March sunshine cut through bare trees, throwing shadows across the limestone facade. The front door opened silently. I stepped inside. Empty. Every room stripped to its architectural bones. No furniture, no artwork, no curtains. Just walls and floors and ghosts. My footsteps echoed in the foyer. The Venetian chandelier still hung above, too expensive to move, too integrated into the ceiling. Rosalind had chosen it in 2019, standing on this exact spot, pointing up and telling the contractor exactly where she wanted it centered. I walked through the ground floor, living room where Vernon had stood during the fundraiser, dining room where we'd hosted Thanksgiving, kitchen where Kurt had sat across from me, January 18th drinking tea and lying while I watched him perform. The granite countertop held only dust, no keys now. Quentin had collected them weeks ago. I climbed the stairs. The marble steps were cool beneath my shoes. Halfway up, I stopped where Wren had sat, wearing Rosalind's navy scarf. The landing was empty now. No 9-year-old with knowing eyes, no whispered message about Rosalind being pleased. What does a man do with a house bought with his wife's dreams and reclaimed through his son's destruction? The second floor stretched empty in both directions. I walked to the sitting room where Kurt had pitched his Arizona development. The projection screen was gone. The chairs were gone. Only the sage green linen curtains remained Rosalind's last choice for this room, still hanging, because Kurt probably didn't remember she'd chosen them. I touched the fabric, soft, familiar. She'd held swatches up to this window, asking my opinion even though she'd already decided. Whatever you choose will be perfect, I'd told her. She'd smiled. You always say that, because it's always true. The room smelled like dust and emptiness and faint memories of champagne from a fundraiser that ended in exposure. I walked back downstairs to the drawing room. This was where it started. New Year's Eve, standing outside in the cold, watching through this window as Kurt's family celebrated. Wren opening presents, Tanner laughing. Kurt and Marlene playing host in a house they'd never owned. Now the room stood empty. Furniture gone, Christmas tree gone, family gone. I looked out the window at the front porch. Snow had melted. Early wildflowers pushed through soil beside the steps. Purple crocuses, first sign of spring. Rosalind had planted those bulbs years ago. She'd loved how they came back every March, reliable and beautiful and stubbornly hopeful. The front door opened. Quentin's footsteps crossed the foyer, found me in the drawing room. "You're early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He stood beside me, looking out at the crocuses. We didn't speak for a long moment. "It's yours now," Quentin finally said. "Free and clear. The foundation owns it, you control the foundation. You can do whatever you want." Victory is supposed to feel like vindication, but this felt like standing in a graveyard where I'd buried my own family. "I don't want to keep this house for myself," I said. Quentin turned to look at me. "What? It was never about owning it." I gestured at the empty room, the bare walls, the bones of Rosalind's vision. I needed to take it back. Needed Kurt to understand he couldn't just take, but keeping it. Living here, that's not what Rosalind would have wanted. "Then what will you do with it?" I looked at the wildflowers again, purple against brown soil pushing toward sunlight. Rosalind had always loved spring flowers, loved how they represented new beginnings, fresh starts, life persisting after winter. Something Rosalind would have wanted, I said. Something that lasts longer than revenge. Quentin waited for my answer, legal pad ready to document whatever came next. Outside the window, wildflowers pushed through March soil, where I'd stood in January darkness, watching strangers celebrate in my wife's house. The foundation had a name. Now it needed a purpose. The papers converting the Greenwich mansion into Rosalind House covered Quentin's desk like a battlefield surrender. I signed each page slowly, reading every clause even though we drafted them together. Articles of incorporation, mission statement, endowment structure, operating guidelines. Each signature felt like sealing a promise. Rosalind worked nights for years, so Kurt could have opportunities. I said, signing the final page, I want this house to serve people like her, those who gave everything and got forgotten. Quentin watched me date the last signature. The foundation will serve approximately 60 to 80 individuals annually based on current endowment projections. 60 to 80 people, widows living alone, elderly without family nearby, people who'd sacrificed for children, who'd moved away or stopped calling, people who'd worked themselves to exhaustion and ended up isolated. People like Rosalind would have been if she'd lived longer. Guess good, I said. Let it outlive me and everyone who remembers why it started. The trust documents sat in a separate folder, $1.8 million, to fund operations in perpetuity. The mansion itself valued at $3.2 million, converted to community asset. Kurt had wanted to leverage it for profit. Now, it would serve those who'd never seen profit from their own sacrifices. Opening is scheduled for June 15th, Quentin said. The contractors estimate completion by early June. June 15th. Less than 6 months after New Year's Eve, when I'd stood in the snow, watching strangers celebrate. 6 months to reclaim it, expose the fraud, and transform it into something that mattered. Revenge had taken 6 weeks. Legacy would take the rest of my life. I knew which one Rosalind would have chosen first. I gathered the signed papers, stacked them neatly. Thank you, Quentin, for all of it. He nodded. She would have approved. I hope so. The call from Celeste Hampton came a week later. I was sitting at my Pennsylvania kitchen table when my phone rang. Mr. Perry, this is Investigator Hampton. I wanted to thank you personally. Your documentation helped us close the fraud case and protect other potential victims. We estimate your actions prevented a dozen families from losing their retirement savings. A dozen families. I hadn't thought about them as real people, just as proof of Kurt's deception. But they were real. Couples in their 60s and 70s who'd believed Kurt's promises. I did the right thing for selfish reasons, I said. That still counts as doing right. I want to be transparent about something, Celeste said before I could respond. My own attorney advised me that my obligation to report was triggered when I confirmed the fraud structure, which I did last November, when the documentation became clear enough to be certain. I filed a confidential report with the Connecticut Department of Banking on November 28th. That report is what triggered the formal investigation. Your documentation accelerated the timeline, but the state was already watching. She paused. I want you to know I didn't wait to protect myself. I reported the moment I was certain. I believe you, I said, and I did. Celeste laughed quietly. It does. I also wanted to let you know your son is cooperating with our office. He's providing testimony about how the fraud developed. I thought you'd want to know. Kurt, cooperating, probably negotiating for a lighter sentence. The old me would have wanted details, what he said, how he justified it, whether he'd mentioned my name. He's not my concern anymore, I said. The words tasted strange but true. But I hope he finds his way. Marlene Perry accepted a plea deal yesterday. 3 years probation, community service, restitution to the Medical Licensing Board. 3 years probation for forging medical documents, attempting to steal guardianship while I was grieving. It seemed light, but I didn't care enough to be angry anymore. Thank you for calling, I said. I hung up and sat in silence. Kurt cooperating, Marlene on probation, the family I'd destroyed piece by piece now scattered and rebuilding in ways I'd never see. I'd let them go. Not forgiveness I wasn't capable of, that yet maybe never would be. But I'd released my grip on the anger, on the need to monitor their consequences. Just letting go. Late March brought the first real warmth. I drove to Greenwich on a Thursday afternoon, flowers on the passenger seat, purple iris, Rosalind's favorite. The cemetery looked different in spring, green grass replacing brown, trees budding, the smell of earth and growing things instead of frozen ground. I placed the iris in the granite vase, sat on the bench facing her grave. Your name is on something good now, I said quietly. A house that serves people who gave everything and got forgotten. You would have liked that. The wind carried the scent of hyacinth from somewhere nearby. I saw Wren wearing your scarf, the navy one. She said you'd be pleased. I paused. I think you would be. Not about Kurt that was ugly and necessary, and I'm not proud of how it felt, but about the house, about making sure your sacrifice meant something. A bird landed on a nearby headstone, cocked its head, flew away. I let Kurt go, Rosalind, not forgiveness, just letting go. There's a difference. Footsteps on the path behind me. I turned. A woman in her early 60s approached carrying a thermos and 2 ceramic cups. She wore a dark blue coat, her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her face was kind, weathered by grief, but not broken by it. I'd met Norma Garrett here in January, 2 widows visiting graves in the cold. She'd offered me tea that first time, and we'd talked about nothing important. Small kindnesses between strangers who understood loss. "You brought the thermos again?" she asked. I smiled, holding up the cups I'd brought. This time, I brought 2 cups. Norma Garrett sat beside me on the bench. She poured tea into both cups. The steam rose between us, carrying the scent of chamomile and honey. "Who are you visiting?" I asked, though I knew. Her husband's grave was 3 rows over. "Harold, 20 years last month." She handed me a cup. The ceramic was warm against my palms. "You, Rosalind, 8 months. Still fresh then. Getting easier, some days. Some promises you keep to the living, some you keep to the dead. The hardest ones you keep to yourself." "I'm opening a foundation," I said, in her name. "Support Center for People Living Alone. Opens in June." Norma nodded. "That's good work." "It's something?" "It's more than something." We drank in comfortable silence. March wind scattered flower petals across the grass, catching them against headstones. The tea was sweet and warm and tasted like new beginnings. For the first time since January, I wasn't alone in the cold. June sunshine turned the Greenwich mansion into something Rosalind would have recognized, full of people, full of purpose, full of life. The renovation had brightened everything. New paint, wider doorways, railings along the halls. But the bones were still hers. The crown molding she'd chosen, the window placements, the Venetian chandelier. The house remembered her, even as it served others. Tables filled the front yard, shaded by canvas awnings. Elderly couples sat drinking lemonade, talking. A woman in her 70s laughed at something her companion said. I recognized that laugh, the sound of someone who'd been alone too long, finally finding community. Quentin stood near the entrance directing volunteers. He caught my eye and nodded. Time for the speech. I stepped onto the front porch, the same porch where I had stood in January, snow looking through windows at strangers in my wife's house. 5 months ago. Felt like decades. The crowd quieted. "My wife worked nights so our son could attend good schools," I began. "She came home at dawn, slept a few hours, then did it all again. She never asked to be remembered, never wanted monuments." I gestured at the house behind me. "This place is proof that sacrifice isn't forgotten. The people who gave everything, the parents who worked themselves to exhaustion, the spouses who kept homes running alone, the grandparents who raised children when parents couldn't, they deserve to be seen. To know their sacrifices mattered." Norma Garrett sat in the front row, gray hair catching the sunlight. She smiled at me. "Rosalind House opens today to serve anyone who needs it. No applications, no income verification, no questions about whether you deserve help." I paused. "If you're alone and need community, you're welcome here." That's what Rosalind would have wanted. The crowd applauded. I stepped down, walked to Norma. "Thank you for being here," I said quietly. "You were the first person I invited." She laughed. "First time I've been first for anything in 40 years. The morning blurred into afternoon. Tours of the facility, introductions to staff, elderly visitors, exploring the library and common rooms. An 80-year-old woman sat at the piano in the drawing room and began playing hymns from memory. Rosalind would have loved this. Around 3 o'clock I saw them. 2 teenagers walking up from the street. They must have taken the bus. Tanner Perry. 17 now, taller than I remembered. Ren Perry, 9 years old, wearing a navy wool scarf despite the June heat. They stopped at the bottom of the front steps. Tanner looked up at me uncertain. Ren held his hand. I walked down to meet them. Tanner didn't speak. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out the pocket watch, the one that had belonged to my father, the one Kurt had taken, and sold the one Tanner must have tracked down and bought back, and placed it in my palm. The metal was warm from being carried. I felt the engraving on the back, to Harold Perry, 25 years service, 1952. "It belongs to you now," I said, closing Tanner's hand around it. "Just know where it came from. Your great-grandmother Rosalind carried this to work every night shift for 3 years after my father died. said it reminded her someone had worked hard before her, and she could work hard too. Tanner's eyes widened. He hadn't known that story. As keep it, I said, remember what it means. A watch that witnessed 3 generations of family, one who earned it, one who abandoned it, one who returned it, knowing its weight. Wren touched the navy scarf around her neck. She would have liked this place. I think so too. Dad doesn't know we came, Tanner said quietly. We just wanted to see it. You're welcome here anytime, both of you. Wren hugged me quick, fierce, then pulled away. They walked back down the driveway together, Tanner slipping the watch into his pocket, Wren's scarf trailing in the June breeze. I stood watching until they disappeared around the corner. By sunset, the crowd had thinned. Quentin locked the supply rooms. Norma helped fold table linens. The volunteers departed one by one. I walked through the empty rooms one final time. The sitting room where Kurt had pitched his fraud. The kitchen where he'd sat drinking tea and lying. The drawing room where I'd watched through windows on New Year's Eve. I stopped in the main room, the one where Quentin had revealed the trust documents where 40 investors had watched Kurt's world collapse. Through the window, I could see the front porch, the spot where I'd stood in January darkness alone and grieving, planning revenge. I pulled out my phone. Rosalind's voicemail sat in my saved messages 9 months old. I'd listened to it 100 times since her death, her voice asking me to pick up milk, ordinary, mundane. The last recording of her I'd ever have. I pressed play one final time. Hey, it's me. Don't forget milk on your way home. And Arthur? Her voice softened. Remember what matters. Okay, the rest is just noise. Love you. Remember what matters. I had, finally. I kept my word, Rosalind, I whispered to the empty room. I kept my word. I pressed delete. The confirmation appeared, message deleted. My hand shook slightly, but I didn't feel grief, felt completion. You can spend a lifetime building a family or destroying one, but legacy isn't measured in blood. It's measured in what survives after the blood is gone. Sometimes to protect the legacy of one you love, you must let go of one you once loved. Rosalind knew. Took me 68 years to learn. I turned off the lights, walked to the front door, locked it behind me. The same door where this story began, where I'd stood outside my own life looking in at strangers, where I'd felt invisible, forgotten, erased. But this time, I walked towards someone waiting. Norma stood by her car holding 2 thermoses. She smiled when she saw me. Thought you might want tea for the drive home, she said. I'd like that. The evening air smelled like cut grass and summer flowers. Somewhere down the street, children were playing their laughter, carrying on the breeze. The taste of lemonade still lingered from earlier, sweet and sharp and alive. I got into the passenger seat. Norma started the engine. You did good work today, she said. We did good work. She pulled out of the driveway. I looked back once at the mansion Rosalind house, now full of purpose, full of meaning, full of the legacy she'd earned. The house belonged to her memory now. I finally belonged to the future. And to you listening to my story, remember this family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound. But how you respond to it defines who you become. Don't make my mistake of waiting so long to act. I spent months planning revenge when I could have been building legacy from day one. Yes, I exposed the fraud. Yes, I protected what Rosalind built. But I also destroyed whatever chance remained for my son to find redemption. That weight, that's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Here's what this family story taught me. Protecting someone's memory matters more than punishing their betrayers. Rosalind worked night shifts so Kurt could have opportunities. When he squandered that sacrifice, I had 2 choices: become consumed by revenge or honor her legacy through service to others. I chose both, but in hindsight, only one brought peace. I believe God allowed this family betrayal to teach me what truly lasts. Not property, not confrontation, not even justice. What lasts is how you love people after you're gone. Through the institutions you build, the values you defend, the sacrifices you make visible. So, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced family betrayal like this? What would you have done in my position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this family story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear a family story like this. And if you want more stories about family faith and finding your way through the hardest moments, subscribe to Revenge Dad. Your perspective matters here. Thank you for staying until the very end. Before you go, one last reminder, some details have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. What's real is the lesson, and I hope it stays with you.